It's Christmas Eve. Santa's going around the world on his sled. And you know what? Maybe you and I should try and do that too. Hey, you, how's it going? How are you? Welcome to this, your Friday edition of the show, your Christmas Eve edition of the show. You did it. You made it through yet another week. Your Christmas weekend is upon you. And you know what? You have earned this because every single day you work so hard, you grind away, you give the best that you are for the people that matter the most. And not only that, you do so much that helps keep our little part of the world turning. And I want to say thank you to you for everything that you do. You're doing awesome. Hang in there. You got this. You are a badass. And if you need something, if there's anything I can do for you to make your Christmas Eve better, hit me up. At ADSXE is where you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ADSXE. Put it in your phone now in case you need it later. I'm here with you. I'm here for you. So yeah, the big guy in the red suit with the stomach that shakes like a bowl full of jelly when he ho-ho-hos is getting on his sled and heading around the world to deliver toys and goodies to all the good boys and girls all across the globe. Some of the bad boys and girls, too, as I know from personal experience. I was not always awesome as a kid, yet somehow Santa managed to make it. Anyways, I have been on the other side of the world for 1 month now. A little longer, actually. It was funny because it felt like a month. I wasn't actually counting the days. I came out to try and collect my father, who had a medical emergency in Kosovo where he's been living for the last 15 years. And, well, it was supposed to be a 3-day trip, and it wound up being significantly longer. Every step of the way, something got more difficult, more complicated. There was a new threat to his life as one health problem cleared up. Another one was there to replace it, and here I am. And I know it's been a month because, well, after it turned out to be more than just 3 days, I went and got the little international addition to my cell phone plan so I wouldn't rack up an enormous bill. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna have way more than I need, but I'm gonna get the 30-day international pass with my cell phone plan. That ran out a couple of days ago, and it said, would you like 30 more days or would you like 10 days? I was like, you know what? Sign me up for the full 30 because as this last month has taught me, you never know. So here we are. Spending Christmas Eve in Macedonia, where I traveled from Kosovo with my father in an ambulance with lights flashing as we crossed international borders to get him a new battery for his pacemaker because his old one, well, he'd really worked that one out with his health problems over the last several months. The battery was dead. And in Kosovo, because of borders and customs and because everything there is more complicated as a newer country, they said it would have taken 15 to 20 days for them to get that pacemaker battery. And they also said my father might not make it 15 to 20 days without it. So here I am in Macedonia on Christmas Eve. My father has his new pacemaker battery. I, fingers crossed, know how and when we are getting home. It's not in time for Christmas, but it seems as though I have an end date, which I will not mention because I do not want to jinx it. But in addition to this whole trip being an exercise in putting one foot in front of the other and trying to do the next best thing as you figure it out. In addition to this whole trip being a lesson in under no circumstances must you stop, under all circumstances must you do whatever it takes to move forward. In addition to being a lesson in that, it's also been a lesson in international diplomacy. Try negotiating these things through Google Translate, which does not always translate accurately. Try figuring out conflicts between two hospital groups in 3 different languages. My English, their Macedonian, and someone else's Albanian. It's not a situation where you can go in with guns blazing. You have to proceed cautiously. The whole thing is a massive Jenga construction and one out-of-place word, and it could all fall down. Why? Well, because my father and I are both guests in this country. Their governments, their institutions are under zero obligation to us. Now, I have to tell you, everyone here has been unbelievably awesome to us, but they did not have to be. And I was cognizant of that going in. I got unbelievably lucky. If you ever find yourself in a foreign country and you ever find yourself in a situation where you need some help and you're an American, call the American Embassy. The American Embassy in Pristina, Kosovo has been an absolute godsend to my father and ultimately to me as I try and navigate all of this. There's someone that works there, a couple people that work there. Megan Boschkum, if you're listening, thank you so very much. Without you, I just straight up would not have made it. Meg, interestingly enough, comes from Houston, where I've spent a good portion of my life, where I've been on the radio for 17 years on 94.5 The Buzz. I think she was actually familiar with the radio station. If you are listening to this in Houston, she used to live there. She used to take her kids ice skating at the Galleria. And she actually started listening to this podcast and suggested to me, hey, why don't you talk about what it's like being in a foreign country? I've discovered you can take me out of Texas, but you'll never take the Texas out of me. And I said, yeah, Texas doesn't wash out. They have to come and take it. And she was like, interestingly enough, did you know that the sort of Texas liberty or death, come and take it thing is adopted from the people of Uruguay? It's a little known fact that most Texans aren't aware of, she was telling me. She said that Texas and Uruguay have a lot more in common than you would think. And it got me thinking about where I am, about how little we really know about that which is different to our immediate surroundings. And look, this trip has not been easy. This trip has not been fun. But it has been a lesson in international relations and international diplomacy. I am what they call a third culture kid, meaning I grew up without a real sense of home. I was born in Brussels. I was born in Brussels to American parents. I'm kind of a second generation third culture kid. My father was born in England, but moved to America when he was like 2-3 years old, grew up there, and, well, moved to Brussels with my mom, where I was born. Then we lived in New York for a while, and then we moved to England, where I spent most of my life growing up. I don't really have a sense of home. I feel very connected to Texas. I feel very connected to New York. I feel very connected to England. I feel very connected to all of these places. And I've struggled a little bit in the past with a sense of home, thinking, I need to get back to my roots. I need to get back to New York. Well, then I'll miss Texas. And really, I grew up in England. Well, I should go back to England. Well, there are no baseball games in England. How could I possibly feel I'm at home if I can't turn on the TV 162 nights of the year and watch my New York Mets lose? Although, there is some faint hope now that Uncle Steve and Uncle Buck will lead us to the promised land. And by the promised land, I mean a division win. Baby steps. But I realized I don't have a real sense of home, and maybe I never will. And I decided home is people. Home is everywhere. Home is wherever I make it. And I suppose that's really why it's so cool that I wound up on the radio, because my home has really become the people that I talk to every single day. This back and forth that you and I have, this relationship that we have built over 17 years, whether you listen to me for 17 years on 94.5 The Buzz in Houston or any of the other stations that I've been on since all that started, or maybe you listened to me back in the day on Sirius XM, which was on all across the country, where I was a morning guy on Alt Nation for a really long time, or Octane or Faction or whatever the case may be. A big part of home is people and feeling connected with them. And here I am, halfway around the world in a tough and tricky situation. And these little chats that we've been having through the podcast that I'm doing in my father's hospital room as he sleeps into my phone, these have given me a sense of home. And I want to say thank you to you and everybody else that's been listening. I cannot tell you how much these conversations and keeping them going has meant to me in this time that has, well, not been easy. You're the best. And in many ways, you are my home, wherever I am. But this trip really kind of taught me something. Well, it reminded me of something important. It's a good idea to get outside your comfort zone. David Bowie once said, about his work, about how he kept changing it, about how he kept morphing into different kinds of artists. He said that you always do your best things outside of your comfort zone. You should be just a little uncomfortable when you're doing what you're doing. That's where you're going to grow. That's where you're going to find the good stuff. And I have to tell you, I agree with that and believe that. It has been a bit of a Herculean effort getting all this stuff done, but I will emerge from this month in the Balkans a different, more resilient, more seasoned person with a new set of skills and also a new sense of humility. Not that I think I lacked it before, but there is such great value in doing what Santa Claus is doing right now, going around the world and putting yourself into situations where you are the stranger in the strange land, where you are observing someone else's customs, where you are understanding that the world doesn't start and end outside of your front door. It's a humbling, educational thing, and it makes you feel like a stronger, better person after this. Obviously, what's going on in the world with COVID hasn't made traveling outside international borders super easy over the last couple of years. But just getting outside of your bubble, whatever bubble that may be. It might be going to the next town. It might be going to the next county. It might be going to watch an opposing football team in their stadium. I don't know. But, well, after spending the better part of 2 years in my home during COVID, and then having to become a bit of a world traveler over the last month or so, it's reminded me of the education that you get by leaving your bubble. It's reminded me of the importance of putting yourself in new, different, unfamiliar situations. It's great to be home, wherever that may be. It's great to be comfortable. It's great to be able to breathe out and relax and be yourself. Home is where the heart is. Home is so important. And I got to tell you, when I get home, I will appreciate it that much more. And to put it bluntly, the last month has freaking sucked. But one of the things that's got me through it is, trying to find the positive in the situation. And that positive has been, well, I'm getting some time with my dad, and that very nearly ran out the other month. I'm getting some extra time with my father. And, well, that's invaluable. And then I'm picking up all these new skills. I'm learning the value of an American embassy when you're outside of a country. I've never had an emergency when I've traveled. I'd been in a band before I was on the radio. And it's an interesting thing because, well, when you're in a band, travel is part of the job description. On the one hand, you get to travel, go all over the world and see it. On the other hand, you have to. And it was weird being a kid that grew up living in all these different countries and then being a kid that spent a good chunk of his life on the road, seeing lots of parts of the world, to being in radio, where up until a little while ago, you had to be in one place to do it. There was absolutely no way to do your job anywhere but in the studio. That's changed. COVID forced some change, and it'll be interesting to see what the job description in radio becomes moving forward. That whole work from anywhere thing makes life interesting. But it was strange going from being a bit of a globetrotter to being fixed in one place for so long. And this has forced me to get out there. And so I guess thanks to Meg pointing this out and asking me how a month in the Balkans has changed me, and her pointing out that she is a bit of a third culture kid as well. Someone that's from Houston that takes Houston with her wherever she goes in her work for various U.S. embassies around the world. But someone who also gets itchy feet after a few years in one place. She and her husband want to see something else, do something different, move on to a different part of the world and experience that. Always while carrying that sense of home with them. It's reminded me that making like Santa and doing some traveling, getting outside that bubble, getting outside your comfort zone is going to make you a stronger, better, more resilient person. And not only that, you'll have some refreshed and renewed perspective. I think it's very valuable for all of us to see that the world doesn't start and end with where we live and our lives. That sense of home is so important, but I think we get lost in that daily grind. You live in your home. Sometimes you work in your home, especially since COVID. You get in your car, you go to and from the job, you fight traffic all week. You listen to me on your ride home or your ride in or whenever you're listening to these podcasts or wherever you listen to me on the radio in the past. You do everything you can to make it to the weekend. And, well, that has become the grind, the traditional American day-to-day grind. And in many ways, that's an absolutely beautiful life and a beautiful thing. And I see traveling all over the world, as I've been forced to do in the last several months, that we have it in many, many ways very, very good at home. There's so many things that I am unbelievably grateful for that just don't really exist in a lot of other parts of the world. And I don't need to get into what those are now, but suffice to say, being out here has done two very important things. It's given me a refreshed, renewed perspective on how much I appreciate home. And it's also, well, put me in a situation where I've had to integrate myself into other people's customs and traditions and ways of doing business. And I've had to do this not only for my own sake, but also for my father's survival. You start assessing situations really, really quick when your parents' life hangs in the balance and you want to figure out the best thing to do and the best way forward. And doing that, putting yourself in a situation where you are the fish out of water, you are the stranger in the strange land, you are outside your comfort zone. Not only do you grow from it, but I think it really helps to bridge gaps of culture and understanding and that which would divide us. The one thing that destroys prejudice is contact. It's much, much easier to have a problem with someone when they're not in your life. I spent a good chunk of my time in San Diego for the last few years. I was on a radio station there, Rock 105.3, and that was one of the stations I was on while I was working for iHeartRadio, and I really, really like San Diego. I mean, first and foremost, obviously, San Diego is beautiful. There's no two ways about it. Those beaches are something else, and there's plenty of them. Man, San Diego is cool because there's so much coastline that, well, even on the 4th of July, you can find your own little spot for yourself if you want to. You never run out of beach space in that town. And the weather is, needless to say, perfect at all times for the most part. But the other thing I really liked about San Diego was the fact that there's a huge military contingent there. And it's plunked down right in the middle of hippy-dippy tofu sprout eating California. And oftentimes that will represent two very different perspectives. And I found something. Like, my family's mostly from the East Coast, where everyone is traditionally politically one way. The Northeast, New England, that sort of area. You step outside your front door, you know what you're getting. And then I spent like 10 years in Houston, Texas, 10 years plus. And, well, there is the same thing, but in the opposite direction. You step outside your front door, you know what you're getting in terms of people's beliefs and politics and all of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with people knowing who they are and being surrounded by other like-minded folks, whether that's the folks on the East Coast in New England or whether that's the folks deep in the heart of Texas. But the one thing I liked about San Diego was that you had two radically different perspectives living side by side. And it's a lot harder to have a problem with someone when they are your next door neighbor and they loaned you their lawnmower or a cup of sugar, or they might happen to be really hot and you're into them, whatever the case may be. The one thing that prejudice is broken down by is contact. I have absolutely no idea of the difficult political situations that exist in the Balkans. I mean, I know some of them intellectually, but I don't know too much of that. And I don't ask people what their beliefs are here. I ask them how to walk to the hospital. I ask them what this thing on the menu means. They ask me what I'm doing here. I tell them my father's in the hospital up the road. They are kind and supportive and generous. And I am appreciative of their compassion in a difficult situation. And, well, that plus being in an unfamiliar situation has made me a different and I think better person who is more compassionate and appreciative of other people and less closed-minded to things. I wasn't especially closed-minded or discompassionate to begin with, but it made me double down on all that stuff. It made me reaffirm to myself that no matter where you are, where you go, or what you're doing, people are basically good and want to help. At least that's been my experience. Maybe that's because that's what I try and put out into the world myself and it comes back to me. I don't know. But it has been a humbling thing to be here in a different country in a bit of a desperate situation on Christmas Eve. And for that, I am thankful. For Megan Boschkem at the embassy in Pristina, Kosovo, I am thankful. And for the fact that I think I'm going to be home soon with my father, setting him up on the next leg of his life's journey. For that, I am thankful too. And above all, I'm thankful for you. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.